Now, welcome back again to part 2 of these special discussions into Vigilant Thoughts, a citizen journalist with some enlightening posts. So in part 1, we talk about citizen journalism and, the good and bad and why it has become more and more popular. But in this part, we are actually going to delve into his Substack. And in fact, I just realized that it's a bit older, 17th of August, but we watched the whole thing in the video, and I feel like it is still so relevant, don't you think?
Yes.
And the feeling I get here in Malaysia is that we're just kind of a bit behind time, sort of like, people have moved on, but we are like still like, what's happening? And I think it's time for an awakening, okay? So now, when he compiled the video, which we're going to show snippets of, that he was hitting 100,000 subscribers in Telegram. In fact, I recently checked, he was banned from Twitter and was recently allowed to return. So I think he has exceeded those numbers in many, many platforms because he was doing a really good job. And this video really kind of his summary of his journey into investigating and exposing vaccine mandate, lockdown policy, etc., etc. So I think to set the scene, let's play a video first.
My message to vaccinated Americans is this: what more is there to wait for? What more do you need to see? We've made vaccinations free, safe, and convenient. The vaccine has FDA approval. Over 200 million Americans have gotten at least one shot. We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. Get vaccinated.
So you basically said this is going to be like, well, it's almost like, you probably don't see it like this, the two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is. So, yep.
Yeah, if you are anti-mandate, you are absolutely anti-vax. I don't care what your personal vaccination status is. If you support, champion, give a green light, give comfort to, support anybody who argues against the vaccine, you are an anti-vaxxer. Absolutely. Your personal vaccination status is utterly irrelevant. If you campaign against the mandate, if you campaign against people being vaccinated in vulnerable settings, teachers in classrooms, I'll be really clear. At that point in time, people were actually supporting the idea of a teacher being unvaccinated in a remote community classroom with kids who cannot be vaccinated. I reject that, Eileen. I still reject it. And if you are out there in any way, shape or form campaigning against this mandate, you are
Now, to give context and just remind all our viewers and listeners, remember part 1, we talk about Vigilant Thoughts quotation, right? There is no tyranny without compliance. And I think we really need to put this at the back of our mind as we go through this discussion. Because the first video, of course, President Biden, just so spooky, right? And he was threatening his own people. It's like you have been elected to fight for the right of the people. You shouldn't be threatening people, not a politician, And this is what Vigilant Thoughts say. And that was the moment that sent a deep chill down my spine. And I decided then and there, I can no longer be a spectator. So he started just like 1.5 years ago to begin to compile. And now look at him. And he has been referenced by many, many top influencers and bloggers, etc., etc. So it's like we look at September 2021, around that time, vaccine mandates all around the world, right? And especially many so-called Western democracies. You see Ardern there, and you see one of the chief ministers from an Australian territory. It's just, I don't know. When I look at that, just the arrogance from the establishment, and it just, I hope people can see them for their true condition, because so many people are like, oh, Jacinda Ardern, such a great politician. But I tell you, she's just a crook. She's just a socialist crook. And I'm not making apology for saying all these things, but people need to begin to wake up that and this is what Thoughts continue to say. Haven't we learned from the mistake of the past? which is you don't single out one group of people for the woes of the entire country. Now, if this sounded familiar, it is because we have seen this before. This is the whole basis of Adolf Hitler's socialist nationalist movement. By the way, so many people are confused. They don't realize that Nazi was actually socialist.
Yeah. I mean, we always... I'm not sure if we actually mentioned it in the podcast before, but socialism is basically the precursor to communism, Marxism.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That was what he was trying to do. It's like, and he later on you see how Mao, how Stalin, they all kind of learn from him. Because that's how you have state control. Use terror as an instrument. Okay, so I find it very interesting that in the same Substack, Vigilant Thoughts began to use use genocide as a discussion. So I think you have it on screen, right? The 10 stages of genocide, and people were like, hey, hold a minute. It's like, get real. We're just talking about vaccine, but when you look at the way genocide happened, I think there is a eerily resemblance to the COVID thing. So let's look at number one, okay? So how do you begin? It all starts with classification. That means people are divided into us and them.
Yeah,
Vaccinated and unvaccinated, right?
Yep.
So that's the first thing. Here's what's available. You can take the vaccine and you become XYZ. Then, of course, these days we still have nobody use with the app, with a certificate. Then you have symbolization, which is really very, very smart. You force people to identify themselves and they'll proudly wear the badge. I'm vaccinated, you are not. And that's where I believe the spirit of self-righteous enters into our society.
Yeah.
And people become unreasonable. People begin to be like, don't come near me, as though I'm an Ebola patient kind of thing. And it all started with misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, like the MySejahtera app, the tracking, the location tracking.
And that's where we go into step 3, discrimination. That means people began to face systemic discrimination, movement control, lockdown, loss of privileges. And even in the early days, so ridiculous, right? If you are vaccinated, you can be in a car. If you are not, you can't be in a car. It's like, what kind of science is that? This is really pseudoscience at its height, okay? And these are all happening, but then we go into becoming more and more serious. Stage 4. What? Stage 4. Dehumanization. That means people, then you begin to say, you have an infectious disease. You are like animals. You are like vermin. You are like disease. It's like you're not very clean and you may affect us. If you touch the leaf knob, please sanitize it. Please use 100% alcohol or whatever.
This is so funny. It just reminds me of what happens in our condo because people are not properly educated, and then hence we sometimes really just literally see people bringing in the sterilizer and
Still do?
Yeah, they do. And they just spray it all over the leaf core buttons. And then now the leaf core buttons is rusty. I'm talking about stainless steel being corroded with all these alcohol rubs, and no one is paying for it, because obviously people are just being, because of that.
I think your sister is in the committee, right? They should do something. Find them, okay? But anyway, that's what happens. And then you start to say, where's your mask and things like that. As if talking and handshake, suddenly no handshake, fist bump, right? I'm glad fist bump is over already. So ridiculous. And then what happens? Then we go into the more serious one. Number 5, organization. Government creates specific groups, police, military, whatever, to enforce policies. And here in Malaysia, of course, the power was given under the Infectious Disease Act. So basically, the local health district, the local health officer have so much power. Remember, people were fined 10,000, 20,000.
Yep.
It is so ridiculous because they didn't sign in. They enter into a restaurant, they don't want to sign in.
Honestly, I wonder what happens to them. Can they get back their
I don't know.
the money,
But I had one friend, and I think somebody complained about their foreign worker for a separate issue, and then they come in and say didn't comply with the SOP. So I think they got a 20,000 fine for the company, and she managed to kind of, after going to many places, she is one of the most persistent person I know. and she got it discount to about 20%, 4,000.
No, I mean, like, even now with all this implosion, I mean, you will still feel that that sort of fine is totally unjustifiable.
Yeah, and that's the thing. People are so fearful. Now it's like now they think about the China tourists are coming back. I don't think I haven't heard anyone say bring back lockdown, but people are like, go to quarantine. The quarantine word came back. Lan Shi was just telling me the other day. It's like, oh my. So that's the thing. They start to try to threaten people. And unfortunately, in Malaysia, number 5, they use the doctors.
Yep.
And the doctors are the one most brainwashed. But anyway, then number 6 and number 7, interesting. It is where at the height of pandemic we went there, but fortunately we didn't go beyond. Number 6, polarization. Government broadcast propaganda to turn the populace against the group. So this is really, we call, we say, look, true republic like the America republic, democratic republic, they are not pure democracy. They are not like the majority, 51%, 52% say you can't do this and we go and kill each other like the French Revolution. So, but what happens here is that you have the government assisting, encouraging the mob rule. And it's like, don't open your business for unvaccinated. And that's why we start to see, if you watch the whole video presented by Vigilant Thoughts, later we'll show another portion. And you start to see people put the sign here, unvaccinated are not welcome. And later on, we see some of the more serious things. Some nation like Austria wanted to have legislation against that. So this is really, but before you do that, you need to encourage the people. You need to have some support.
Yeah.
Even in China, I mean, you look at China, we talked about the China episode a while ago, that for China to continue the lockdown, it needs to have support. When they realize they lost the support, look at how quickly they reverse. Frankly, I am a bit shocked. I thought President Xi is tougher than this. Apparently, he was not.
Yeah.
He seems like, I mean, time will tell, but just from that kind of panicky reaction, he seems weak to me. Because this is the best time for him to go against the United States, against Taiwan. And I'm afraid he has squandered his chance, okay?
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a different topic for another time. Number 7, preparation. So once you get the people behind you, once you get the vaccinated go against the unvaccinated, then official action to remove, relocate people. And we're seeing this with Australia. Towards the end of 2021, they were preparing COVID camps. And this sort of reminds me of World War II. Remember the internment of the Japanese people, Japanese American citizens, because the military were like, we're not sure if they're going to help Japan in World War II, so we better intern the entire people group. And that's crazy, but we are close to that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we didn't happen now. Of course, then the persecution, extermination, denial, all those things happened at Bosnia, happened at Rwanda. And very interesting, number 9, they use the word extermination. You know why? Because extermination is a technical term. It means we are destroying something that ought to be destroyed. Whereas murder is we shouldn't do it. You see how legalistic all these people can become. So what's interesting, and this is Vigilant Thoughts observation, he said towards the end of 2021, we were literally between stages 6 and 7, government encouraging the mob rule, and then if there's enough support, we will start to segregate people.
Yeah.
And we'll even lock up people. I think they're really planning. Now, I have to say I'm glad in Malaysia we don't even have that, because we have so much bread and butter issue. People are not in the appetite for this. Vaccine mandate doesn't really affect us in terms of employment. I don't think anyone in private sector, I mean, of course, there are some companies who are like so... will be like, if you're not vaccinated, you can't enter in the building, those kind of cases. But we don't have this sort of wide vaccine mandate that if you don't take it, you lose your job. I don't think we have that in Malaysia.
No,
so
I don't think so. I guess the approach is probably a bit more passive-aggressive, whereby you sort of like, are you vaccinated? Are you vaccinated? I mean, we can't get METI approval. We can't start work. So hence your salary is going to be affected. I guess it's more that sort of approach that has been employed.
So in fact, the goalposts kept changing. Even Atlantic and other woke mainstream media, December 2021, the headline, is it safe to hang out with unboosted? So you see, first, vaccinated against unvaccinated. Then they create next tier, boost, unboost.
Yep.
Then it will be double boost and single boost. Triple boost, it doesn't end. But fortunately, right at the turn of the year, January 2020, at the face of medical tyranny, we saw a small fringe, small minority, remnant, if you like. And I think from Vigilant Thoughts' point of view, the Western Hemisphere point of view, this was the turning point. The Canadian truckers, and he called them the tip of the spear.
Yeah.
And they were just doing that, and Trudeau was like trying to freeze their bank account, trying to use emergency, but it kind of spurred many protests around the world. And I remember at that time, a lot of protests in Australia, and we saw even in New Zealand, the Maori people, and they were coming out and they were doing their traditional dance in Parliament House. And we saw, I mean, in Malaysia, the only voice was the Malay.
Yeah.
There was the soldier, there was those people. I mean, of course, they came from religious justifications and concern, but nevertheless, they were the only ones voicing out any concerns on forcing people to have vaccine. And then, of course, in Malaysia, January, February, all of a sudden with Johor election, Malacca elections, remember at that time, government was saying that, look, if you have 2 Sinovac, you are above a certain age, those will expire.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's, extend another month, and then the mandate was gone. Now, do you still remember? Then they started to mix and match. And it's like, who even decide you can mix and match? The vaccine manufacturer doesn't say you can do it.
Yep.
So it's like chaos all around. And we start to see in the Western Hemisphere, February 2022 onwards, students started to walk out from school when the school imposed mask mandate. You say I must wear mask, then I'm not going to do it. So Florida, we mentioned Governor DeSantis was one of the first to say no to that. But many places, when they want to do that, the students just walk out in huge protests. And so we are really seeing at the beginning of 2022, protests to end mandates become larger, more frequent, more fierce across the globe. I mean, we don't really see people going out in Malaysia, but we can see that with the election coming out, the government knew they might be punished. So I remember that time who was at KJ, of course, extended to end of February. And I remember Dr. Roland was just saying, look, I predict the mandate will be gone.
Yeah.
He said that in January. And by end of March, it's gone. And February, so many of us went to Sarawak already, remember?
Yep.
So it's really interesting because what really happened, I think to sum up, a few things happened. First, quote unquote, the science was exposed. First, it will prevent you from getting the disease, but everyone get COVID.
Yeah.
And then supposed to stop transmission. But then the cases went out, and now we have evidence from vaccine manufacturer who now say they never tested for transmission. And later it's going to be he say, she say kind of scenario, And it's like, we never say that. You yourself come up with this kind of warranty. I mean, it's so crazy, right? You are government. How can you come out with some kind of opinion which the vaccine manufacturer doesn't even do? Or maybe they do. And I don't know how they're going to explain, but it's just such a huge mess. So the science was exposed. Then what else we have? Public opinion shifted.
Yep.
And I think the truckers, and of course, there were packets of things happening. And even now we know that a lot of the adverse events were suppressed, but eventually you can't suppress everyone. Even with your big technology, you can't stop everyone. So that's why if people have the initiative and mind to really go and find out. I mean, there are so many things you say it's censored, Google will not show, but there are so many ways to find out. Let's just share one tip, okay? A lot of things cannot be found on Google search engine, but you should try Bing, you should try Yahoo, you should try whatever, because they really show certain things that Google doesn't want to share.
Yep.
And I know in the past people kind of like, oh, Google is the best. Yeah, I mean, it's the most in-depth kind of search engine, but many things which is a bit unconventional you can find in other search engine. Nobody has monopoly over information, and internet never forgets.
Yep.
Then, of course, we start to see from January 2020 onwards, the vaccine mandates go down one by one. And I think end of March 2022 was the beginning of the end for Malaysia. Now, I think I want to show the next part, which is a very interesting video. And I think this video is a narration by one of the gatherings during the Canadian truckers, and they quoted extensively by a journalist, Australian journalist, and I was just checking her, Susan Dunham, and I think she is a citizen journalist also. So it's quite interesting. So it's not her article in this narration, but they quoted extensively. So let's play this video and then we'll talk about that.
Yep.
If COVID was a battlefield, it would still be warm with the bodies of the unvaccinated. Thankfully, the mandates are letting up and both sides of the war stumble back to the new normal. The unvaccinated are the heroes of the last 2 years, as they allowed us all to have a control group in the great experiment and highlight the shortcomings of COVID vaccines. The unvaccinated carry many battle scars and injuries, as they are the people we tried to mentally break. Yet no one wants to talk about what we did to them and what they forced the science to unveil. We knew that the waning immunity of the fully vaccinated had the same risk profile as others within society as the minority of the unvaccinated, yet we marked them for special persecution. You see, we said that they had not done the right thing for the greater good by handing their bodies and medical autonomy over to the state. Many of the so-called health experts and political leaders in Australia admitted the goal was to make life almost unlivable for the unvaccinated, which was multiplied many times by the collective mob, with the fight taken into workplaces, friendships, and family gatherings. Today, the hard truth is none of it was justified, as we took a quick slide from righteousness to absolute cruelty. We might lay the blame on our leaders and health experts for the push, but each individual within society must be held accountable for stepping into the well-laid-out trap. We did this despite knowing full well that principled opposition is priceless when it comes to what goes inside our bodies, and we let ourselves be tricked into believing that going into another ineffective lockdown would be the fault of the unvaccinated and not the fault of the toxic policy of ineffective vaccines. We took pleasure in scapegoating the unvaccinated because after months of engineered lockdowns by political leaders blinded by power, having someone to blame and turn to burn at the stake felt good. We believed we had logic, love, and truth on our side, so it was easy to wish death upon the unvaccinated. Those of us who ridiculed and mocked the non-compliant did it because we were embarrassed by their courage and principles and didn't think the unvaccinated would make it through unbroken. And we turned the holdouts into punching bags. Lambie, Carr, Chant, Andrews, McGowan, Gunner, and the other cast of hundreds in prominent roles, and we here in America, we could add Fauci and the rest of them, and Biden in prominent roles need to be held to account for vilifying the unvaccinated in public and fueling angry social media mobs. The mobs, the masked Nazis, and the vaccine disciples have been embarrassed by betting against the unvaccinated because mandates only had the power we gave them. It was not compliance that ended domination by big pharma companies, Bill Gates and his many organizations, and the World Economic Forum. It was thanks to the people we tried to embarrass, ridicule, mock, and tear down. We should all try and find some inner gratitude for the unvaccinated as we took the bait by hating them, because their perseverance and courage bought us the time to see we were wrong. So if mandates ever return for COVID or any other disease or virus, hopefully more of us will be awake and see the rising authoritarianism that has no concern for our well-being and is more about power and control. The war of the unvaccinated was lost, on the unvaccinated was lost, and we should all be very thankful.
Wow, it's really, really an interesting summary, right? I mean, this was around August 2022, but I feel like we are just at the beginning of the implosion, right? Now, for those viewers and listeners, you're wondering why the narration say, sort of apologize, because they were quoting this journalist Susan Dunham,
Yep.
who were vaccinated, who was holding that high self-righteous position, but then she could begin to see the whole things unraveling one by one. And that's why she said, we should be thankful because their resistance created all this exposure. But just from the narration, what are some of your, I mean, there's so many things mentioned there, right? Talk about the control group, talk about principle opposition. I mean, so many things, but what kind of, what comes to your mind, as the major issue coming out from all these implosions and, of course, the ending of mandate, etc., etc.?
Yeah, I suppose with the major issue, it's really just the vast compliance that people are adhering to,
Yep.
especially towards the things that are being promoted by big pharma companies.
Mm.
I mean, knowing that a lot of these big pharma companies a lot of the patent medicines are actually expiring. So I guess they really do need to create something, and they were actually the biggest beneficiary from this whole pandemic.
Yep.
And also, of course, like Bill Gates. I mean, there has just been a lot of food shortages worldwide, and he's the one that is just buying off farms.
Yep.
And then there were a lot of fire outbreaks in all this food storage area and stuff like that. So I guess people need to really just begin to think, who are the main beneficiary out of all this thing? I mean, when people are suffering, because thanks to Malaysia, I mean, for lack of better words, I guess the bread and butter issue, we don't really see so much of all this sort of tyranny. But then in the States and stuff like that, I mean, there are still surprisingly a large camp of people who are really supporting this. But like what the narrator was saying, I mean, thanks to the unvaccinated ones, because of this, we were able to regain some control. Because of this, we were able to stand against the tyranny of the government. So I think it's really, I mean, if there's a lesson that we really learned from this whole thing, it's really the fact that there is that courage that people need to begin to tap into, that people need to begin to just channel it out. And then, because do we really want that much control from our government? I mean, do we want to hand over our health autonomy to the state, like what is being narrated in here? So that sort of thing, I think really people need to just begin to find a way back. I think it's really great that they say it says here that the perseverance, the courage of all these unvaccinated actually bought a lot of time for this.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about big government versus small government for such a long time. And even with our new, I mean, we don't call it unity government, right? I mean, what do we call that? We call that Anwar Ibrahim-led government with support from Yan Lang. And but really, we say in this show already, it's the beginning of decentralization. It's the beginning of, look, we can't rely on governments. And I really believe that one of the things that Anwar Ibrahim will have to do is to revise the subsidy. Is that we can't continue, the government cannot continue to basically beat government and say we can support you, we can help you in everything, because that's not what government is supposed to do. Government is supposed to provide a platform, provide security, opportunity, policies that encourage economic movement, safety. But then during the pandemic, we have seen you can't really rely on government, because government can't even rely on themselves. So that's really, really interesting, because it goes back to what we have been saying, right? There is no tyranny without compliance, and there's no freedom without self-determination.
Yep.
You think about it, the follow-up. But one of the things that really strike me very interesting is he talked about the control group. And the control group, of course, talking about, because the unvaccinated, you have a large group of people who didn't take the vaccine, suddenly there's a comparison between the health quality of life. Now, I'm not saying that it is conclusive or anything that those vaccinated have a lot of adverse effects, but we're beginning to see some sort of implosion. And, we're already seeing that the health patency has dropped significantly. Claims by insurance, claims against insurance have gone up so much despite the rollout of vaccine.
Yep.
So it's like either your vaccine doesn't work at all, which is the good news, or the very, very bad news. The vaccine actually harm your immune system. So Robert Malone was one of those. He is the inventor of mRNA, and he said, look, the way, because mRNA is basically a carrier, a DNA carrier to deliver information. Because the way it's set up, because so little time to see the impact, so little research is done. You know, when you do a vaccine, it has to be stages by stages, category by the category. You cannot roll out all like this because you don't know what are the risk factor and things like that. So he really believed that, look, because of that, the spike protein is replicating itself. Now, this is a different discussion altogether, and I think we should have another episode,
Yeah.
you know, maybe we launch it just to talk about what's been happening with the American football athlete and things like that. Are we seeing more and more? And maybe even with Dr. Roland, you know, I'm looking forward to talk to him again because this is the right time for people to kind of have an introspection, you know, because we need to learn from history. Otherwise, we risk repeating it. So there is a control group. Thank goodness that there are some people who didn't give in.
Yep.
And, you know, we talk about risk-benefit analysis, but now with the data, it's even more clear already because it's like, hey, is your quality of life better or worse? You know, and some are tangible, some are not tangible. But of course, you know, in law, it is, you know, every time you have someone maybe have, you know, myocarditis and things like that, then people will be thinking, is it a vaccine? And it will be quickly shut down. Did you realize with the American football incident, the first thing happens on the field, the doctor came in and said, it's not the vaccine. And it's like, you know, just reminds me of the joke, right? And it's like, you know, the thief will be like trying to steal the goal, and when the police come and you say, the goal is not here. The goal is not here. You know, it's like so obvious you're trying to say it's not the vaccine. So, but anyway, we'll see, because in the law, tort, of course, is an area of law where you want to try to prove wrongdoing. Causation is the most challenging part.
That's why you test for negligence, right?
Yeah, so you one of the elements. So you need to have a duty of care. You need to have causation. That means the damage, something happened to you, is linked with the product or or the cause. Then of course the final element is actual damage. So let's say you have vaccine and you have no injury. You know, some people are just so healthy, no injury. Then there's no tort because you're fine.
Yep.
And we know there are many people like that. But for many others, causation is going to be very, very tricky. Okay. So that's the thing that kind of come into my mind when I hear the control. And so what else? You know, maybe one or two more points, and then we can sort of wrap up this part. I mean, I've seen the video so many times, but it's still so very interesting every time. So aptly summarized, right?
Yeah, totally. I think one of the things, I think it was also in the video, we're not sure if actually we played this part earlier on. It's the fact that I think there's a rise of populism, especially the support from mama bears.
Yeah.
Or even papa bears for that matter, like the vaccine mandate for school children. So I think that is really, really interesting in that sense that you begin to see people are beginning to pay more interest towards what's happening within the family, what's happening within the education mountain, as in what I've been taught in school. Are my kids actually silently being vaccinated against my will, being a parent, being the protector of the children? So I think that is really another part that is to be observed.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely think so, because I mean, we are making progress, okay? We are, and so just have to keep out, and that's why we do what we're doing, right? We try to bring out the news, try to highlight to people, and hopefully people think for themselves, because we are not trying to push you into a direction. We just say, look, this is happening, these are the data, these are the resources, go and check it out, and hopefully people will start to develop that critical mind, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, just one more thing, you know, so what would you want to say to all our viewers and listeners? You know, let's say, how do you want to encourage them in terms of you know, one of the things, of course, is the courage of unvaccinated. But it's not just them, you know, because later on, many vaccinated people also came alongside them. And I find that that's such a good development because it's not really about vaccinated or unvaccinated. It's really about what's your position when tyranny happens. So maybe just we will end with this. Maybe just one thing you want to say to the viewers and listeners, you know, what they should be doing, what they can do so that they will really come to a place where if there is a need, they will rise up to principal opposition.
Yeah, I think what we are seeing is that, I mean, there are just so many platforms out there, so many things that we can begin to do, and like just going to the school boards, or even like just be like another Susan Dunham to just be that citizen journalist, or even like us, what we're doing here, like podcasts. Some people like also like in what we saw in GE15, the rise of TikTok. I mean, some of you who are very, very skilled in just making videos, you could just begin to do research and then begin to just put in all this sort of things, and then you just teach people the basic things like what's happening, why is it not good for us to begin to just kowtowing to big government. So because you want to really see, because what was stated in the video as well, it's like if it's not just for this COVID, what about other diseases? What about other crises that happen along the way? What are you going to do? Are you going to leave behind a legacy of protecting the freedom? Are you going to leave a legacy of just pursuing that happiness that you are after? I mean, a lot of us, we are really just after happiness in life. So that's really the kind of pursuit that we are really after. And that's the kind of thing that we could begin to just come to realization. I think at the end of the day, it's like, what sort of legacy do you want to leave behind? I think even like Elon Musk, yes, maybe his intent is yet to be tested. Maybe he's at a stage of considering some legacy. What is the sort of name that he wants to leave behind? I mean, even like President Trump, for that matter. I mean, what's the kind of legacy that he wants to leave behind? Does he want to leave behind a nation that is all for freedom, or a nation that is really just all about tearing down the freedom that the forefathers have fought so hard for?
Yeah, actually, when you talk about legacy, I was thinking about Mahathir, you know, and because he had an opportunity,
and the bridges
and
are
he
all
kind of
just
squandered up.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that's a great that's a great conclusion, because look, this is just the beginning of the journey, and I think in the next few episodes in this season, we're going to unpack more and just try to find ways to encourage and motivate us into this path of self-determination. Okay, so that's it for now for this part 2, and I hope you have enjoyed the show. Do subscribe to our channel, YouTube, Spotify. I think we also have Rumble now, right?
Yep.
So until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.